Hearing on health and welfare. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senators Coleman.
Here.
Carter.
Here.
Arthur. Gannon. Moon. Thompson Reyder. Washington. There are 5.
Great. With 5 members present, we're going to make a motion to move into executive session. Do I have a second? So moved. I want to start with a bill that we did not previously send an email to everybody in the committee, but we had previously discussed it, and the bill sponsor shared with me that he thought that he had the votes to pass the bill out of committee. And so just wanted to double check and make sure there wasn't an objection before I make the motion to bring Senate Bill 1095 before the committee. That is Senator Razer's bill modifying provisions related to abortion. It makes it abundantly clear rather than defining abortion in the negative, it defines it in the, rather than defining it in the positive, it declines to define it in the negative as well. I don't think that the language is quite there, and the bill sponsor is committed to working with the members of the pro-life community to make sure that that new definition also captures what is intended. But before I brought it to the body, I wanted to make sure that you guys didn't have an objection. Okay, great. Then I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to bring before the committee Senate Bill 1095. Do I have a second? The bill is seconded. There is, one moment. Okay, great. Does anyone have any comments? Senator Reyder.
I just want to say that the thing that I realize that the definitions are going to be worked on, but I also wanted to mention this is the bill that clarifies that birth control is not an abortifacient. And I think that is desperately needed in the laws right now.
Okay, thank you, Senator Reyder. Any other comments? Senator Moon?
I don't remember being in the hearing when this bill was presented, and since I haven't looked at it closely, I'm going to be no today and have an opportunity to look at it later.
Thank you, Senator Moon. Any other comments on this bill? Seeing none, I move to pass Senate Bill 1095 due pass. Do I have a second? That's been seconded. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senators Coleman.
Aye.
Carter.
Aye.
I'm sorry.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Arthur. Gannon. Aye. Moon. Thompson Reyder. Washington. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1.
By your vote of 5-1, you have voted due pass Senate Bill 1095. And now I'm looking for a motion to please bring Senate Joint Resolution 76, introduced by Senator Carter, before the body. Do I have a second? The motion has been seconded. Anyone have any comments? Senator Carter, do you have any explanation needed?
This is the workforce workforce requirements. Plenty of carve-outs. We didn't have really any opposition to the language that was meaningful, other than just having aversion to working for some of those things. Anyway, basically.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any further comments on this bill? Seeing none, I'd like to make a motion that we do pass SJR76. Do I have a second? The bill that's been seconded. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senators Coleman.
Aye.
Carter. Arthur. No. Gannon. Moon. Yes. Thompson Reyder. Washington. 5 to 1.
By your vote of 5-1, you have voted due pass SJR 76. I now make a motion to bring before the committee Senate Bill 1245, introduced by Senator Reyder, which modifies provisions relating to children and vulnerable persons. Do I have a second?
Second.
The motion has been seconded. Is there any discussion? Senator Reyder, do you have any comments?
This is our bill that was the product that came out of the Child Exploitation and Sex Trafficking Committee Council that we worked on. And the only change is, and I mentioned that when I was presenting, was that we were making a change to the section on the penalties, and for the years that you can go back, but that's going to be in the floor sub. And so I thought it would be easier with the committee process to come out as is. And then again, all that we're doing is we are extending that timeline for the perpetrator for the offense, charging the perpetrator, but just not the company that the person works at. So that will be in the floor set.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions for the bill handler? Or comments? Seeing none, I make a motion that we vote do pass Senate Bill 1245. Do I have a second?
Second.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senators Coleman,
Aye.
Carter,
Aye.
Arthur, Gannon,
Aye.
Moon, Thompson Reyder, Washington. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6
By your vote of 6-0, you have voted do pass Senate Bill 1245. I now would like to make a motion that we bring before the body in Senate Bill 1336, introduced by Senator Thompson Reyder, which modifies provisions related to the funding for housing programs. Do I have a second? There's now there is a committee substitute that's ending in .02C, which was emailed to you yesterday evening. Senator Thompson Reyder, do you have any comments on the bill or the Senate committee substitute?
I do.
Do you mind turning on your microphone so that people at home can hear? I'm sure there's like one person listening, but we want you to be able to hear.
So on Senate Bill 1336, this is the homeless legislation that we passed last year. In working with a couple of senators, mostly Senator Stephen Roberts' staff and with some of his homeless shelters in St. Louis, the sub has removed the penalty, the misdemeanor. And so we're moving forward with the bill with removing the misdemeanor.
Thank you, Senator, for that explanation. I now make a motion to vote do pass the Senate committee substitute ending in .02C. Oh, I'm voting on the substitute right now.
Okay.
Right, so do I have a second to adopt the substitute?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. We have adopted the substitute. I now move that we vote do pass Senate committee substitute for Senate Bill 1336. Any comments? Senator Moon?
I did read the sub last night. I still have some questions that I need to have answered. I haven't gotten with the sponsor yet, but I will do that. But until that time, I'll be a no today.
Senator Arthur?
Along those same lines, I do appreciate that misdemeanor penalty provision was removed. But I think the bill maybe needs a little more work, and I'm sorry that I haven't gotten with you sooner, but I'll be happy to work with you on it. And for now, I'll be a no, though.
Thank you, Senator Arthur. Any other comments? Seeing none, I now make a motion that we vote do pass Senate committee substitute for Senate Bill 1336. Do pass. Is there a second? Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senators Coleman, Carter, Arthur, Gannon, Moon, Thompson Reyder, Washington. 4-2.
By your vote of 4-2, you have voted do pass the Senate committee substitute for Senate Bill 1336. And with that, we will leave executive session and move into our regular hearing. And we have today a little bit of a change to the schedule. Senator, that we had notified up 2 Senate bills. The Senate sponsor has asked that we not hear those yet. He needs a little bit more time on those bills. And so we're going to move right to House Bill 1706 and 1539. Representative Myers, if you'd please come forward and present the bill when ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jeff Myers. I'm a representative from District 42. And the bill I'm presenting today is 1706 and 1539. This piece of legislation was something that I started working on last year at the end of session. There were several bills going on, and it deals with the aspects of human trafficking. What I did was, after the end of session, went around and started interviewing folks that I'd met, contacts that I made my career in law enforcement, folks that I met through this process, and people that were out actually in the field doing the job. and asked them what are some of the things what are the tools that we could give you today that on August 29, 2024 would start to make a dent into this. And the aspects of those ideas were what I put into this piece of legislation. The bill deals with several different areas. One, there's a training component going after or requiring training from nurses, EMTs, paramedics, social workers, juvenile officers, prosecutors, and law enforcement. The reason being is these professions come in contact with these victims on a regular basis. They need to be able to have the understanding of what they're looking at and the skills to be able to address that. So I've set up a committee to steer and vet that training to make sure it's produced and delivered in an online format so it could be sent out statewide. It's not in addition to any hours, but using some of the hours that they have mandated, making those for whatever profession part of their training. Another aspect in there, at one point I want to put out on the training part, I have a sunset in there after 5 years. If it's not working, I don't believe in creating programs that are just going to go on in perpetuity. So it can be reevaluated and re-upped if it needs to. A visit with the Child Advocacy Center in our area, the hearsay exception that I believe is also in several other pieces of legislation, maybe even the one that you all just exec'd out. That hearsay exception for children under 18 or under 14 having their statements recorded and being able to be played in court, running that from the age of 14 to 18. There's some provision in there on the protection of vulnerable persons as well. That if somebody's developmentally disabled, having that understanding of a 17-year-old as opposed to a 14-year-old where it's at now. Raising the age of enticement for a child from 15 to 17. And this one particular aspect, this was implemented down in Texas, and it had a profound effect, but increasing the penalty for patronizing prostitution. Currently, it's a Class B misdemeanor, and I want to take that to a Class E felony. If we drive down the demand, and if we understand that prostitution is not, it's not a victimless crime, that the majority of folks that are out there that are being prostituted are working for somebody else. The fruits of their labor are going to their trafficker. If we can drive down that demand, we can have a significant impact on that business model as it is now. Then the second to last piece on there is establishing a human trafficking and sexual exploitation fund. This was introduced last year with a $2,500 going to a victim fund and $2,500 going to the county in which the offense occurred, so they could therefore either use it for education or furthering local efforts and law enforcement to fight against this. The change that I made there was assigning $10,000 per identified victim. This is a very cash-heavy business, and the model is you use the victim up, and when they're done, you throw them away and you go get another. The person who doesn't suffer financially is a trafficker. They get to keep that money. They have a lot of liquid assets. I want to be able to try to tap into that and create a fund to get these folks back out of the lifestyle so they don't end up going back to be trafficked again, or they can start their road to recovery. That's jobs training, that's mental and physical care to get them back on the road to getting back out of the lifestyle. And the very last part of that, Senator Thompson Reyder mentioned the statewide council against adult trafficking. This would establish that sunsetted in 2030 or 2024, 23, at the end of the year. This would put it in underneath the purview of the Attorney General's office. It's a good way. There's a lot of nonprofits and a lot of different groups that are working in the space, and it would be an excellent way to be able to coordinate all of those efforts at once. So we added that to this bill as well. I know I ran through that pretty quick, but with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Representative. I actually have a few questions on various different provisions and sections. Does the existing Committee on Sex and Human Trafficking Training currently have Missouri legislators as members, or is it just those 8 members from the Attorney General's office?
So it's it's the people on there were appointed by heads of those departments. So, for example, the Attorney General's office will head that up and basically chair it. DPS report has a representative on there with experience in human traffic investigations, a representative from a child advocacy center, somebody from the court appointed from the juvenile officers, someone supplying
Right, so
victim.
I've got the list of people who are going
Yeah.
to serve. My question was just, do you think there'd be a benefit of adding members of the Missouri legislature to that? Senator Thompson Reyder, just before we execed out a bill from her that she had been working on with a variety of different people on a specific topic, and sometimes for these sunsetted committees, having someone who could help implement the law, serve in those capacities could be a benefit. And I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts about the benefit or
So
negatives of
there are
adding.
4 elected representatives on the statewide council. This would be a subset of that, and I think in that arena, I think it's probably better to have the experts in there
Okay.
that are delivering the product.
Awesome. Kind of keep going. The statewide council then, we're lifting that sunset. Do you think we should add one? One of the things, I know I just said we should add, maybe think about adding legislators, but we have a number of committees that are statutorily required to meet. And then because of the quickness of term limits, people who were spearheading those efforts are out of the building and it's a hard time staffing them. And so, there's a number of committees that statutorily are required to meet but don't show up. Do you think that it would be a benefit to add a sunset to that?
I would entertain that. I don't see any problem with that. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of just creating committees and letting them sit there.
Yeah. And I don't think that's the intent. I'm not trying to insinuate that. I just think that because we have such turnover because of the term limits, making sure that we've got a safety valve to end this if there's not somebody to lead the effort might make sense.
Well, I think my understanding of all this as I read through it is that is basically then transferred over to the human trafficking section of the Attorney General's office. So there will be a dedicated full-time employee for that. That's part of the funding that's going through. It was part of the governor's recs. It's going through the budget process now. That money's in there for specifically that position. So I think that person, depending on who that person is appointed to be in there by the Attorney General, would keep that committee going in spite of having 4 elected officials on there as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. When we're talking, and I'm sorry, there's so many different sections kind of
There
going
is.
through. The training requirement that we're adding to our private sector, whether it's EMTs, paramedics, nurses, physicians, physicians aren't on the list, just registered nurses and LPNs. Have you been working with those associations to make sure that they're comfortable adding those increased requirements, and what portion of this training would be of their overall required continuing education?
So thank you. That's a great question. Yes, this has probably been the biggest work lift that I've had on this whole particular bill. I would say, for example, EMTs and paramedics. EMTs have 100 hours of required. Paramedics, I believe, have to have 140. Of that, and that's a 5-year licensing period, they have, it's an annual basis, but with those, I compromised, went down to 4. I just spoke with the representative from the Nurses Association about adding an RN to this list as well, so they can guide that. But I do think that the representative from a child abuse medical center would have the expertise to push out to their nurses that they need to have an understanding of what they're looking at. But yeah, that's been one of the things. I have talked with almost every group. Some are more welcoming than others, and there will be some folks that come back and testify on behalf of that. The prosecutor couldn't make it from Cole County today, but he's a huge proponent of it, and they'll be sending out the letter he sent in to you guys, you all after the hearing. But that's been the biggest lift. But I will say this, and you can find testimony after testimony after testimony. I went through this training towards the end of my career in 2019. I'm retired in 2021. As I sat in that training, I realized examples of things that I had seen. When there's a 26-year-old and a 16-year-old up in the hotel or the casino having a party with a bunch of guys, and security's throwing them out, and you're like, oh, okay, they're taking care of the problem. I'm sitting in a training finding out that, well, that 26-year-old was working for a pimp, and she was actually training the 16-year-old. And then when you're somebody who takes, the job of being a public servant seriously, that sticks in your craw. But then going forward, there were times when I run into somebody who's 40 years old on this floor of the casino trying to get a several $1,000s cash advance from an 18-year-old's credit card. And they don't resemble each other at all. But when I ask, who's that? Oh, it's my daughter. I go up to the young lady standing outside the casino, and I said, who is this? Well, that's my daddy. Well, daddy's a term in the game, so to speak. And so by being able to recognize that, there's a paradigm shift that took place. It was, I'm no longer approaching that person as like a prostitute or somebody who's involved in criminal activity. I'm now an outlet for services. I'm like, hey, I can be a resource to help get you out of this lifestyle. And so that training aspect of seeing what you're looking at and then having the skills to be able to address it, I think is very important.
Okay, that makes sense. I hear what you're saying. Can we talk about elevating the crime from a misdemeanor to a felony, and what are other examples of e-felonies currently?
So e-felonies, some drug possessions are on there. I think your third DWI is an E. It's the very lowest step, but I think if we go into just looking at who that market is of purchasers of sex, right? And then we get into start just peeling that onion. One, there was a group that does some nonprofit, and I had them pull up just for the month of January the online solicitations, because we can't, since it's a criminal enterprise, all we can get are like hotline reports, right? So from January 29th to February 29th, 2024, they ran a sample size of 25,928 online advertisements. And these are solicitations for sex. Out of that, they pulled out 7,200 individual profiles, so there's several duplicates out there. When they started to break that down using an algorithm, 466 of those were massage parlor ads, 1,700 suspected juveniles. And then when you start looking at that, that is where, when we give examples of modern day slavery, online escort solicitations, that is where the business is at. And then we get into who are the folks that are out being the patrons of this. Most are college educated, have means, or so they either have a nice job or a good job, good paying job. They have families. They have something to lose by getting a felony. But what we have right now is we have this revolving door of, if you're the John, you're the one who's basically being the participant in the trafficking. And there was the group that put out that most, when they went to an internet chat room, that there was an overwhelming percentage of people that knew they were probably patronizing somebody that's being trafficked. We got to try to start addressing the demand, and I think you have to. We're putting all the onus on the person that's being trafficked right now, and we need to change that to the patron who's actually participating in that. And I'm actually looking forward to. There's a gentleman that's going to come up and testify and listen to his story, and you'll understand why.
I appreciate your testimony, Senator Thompson Reyder.
Thank you for this. Okay, so I have a couple of questions. So first, have you and, Rep. Lewis, and I were both on the 9-month-long committee, and the main thing that we came out of that with was, hey, we've got all these fragmented things going on across the state. We need to pull them all together, figure out what's working, what's not, put it all under the Attorney General's office. That person that you mentioned's already been hired. They're already actually working in that capacity. Have you worked with him on this at all? I just want to be sure that we're not adding more fragmentation to the policies that we're doing. Does that make sense? Have you and he worked together on?
I've had quite a few discussions with Representative Lewis. Actually attended several of the meetings over the interim of the committee, and he was gracious enough to allow me to present some of my ideas there. And that's, I brought in the statewide council to put that into statute. The bill that he had filed over on the House side had not been moving. But I added that in committee because I see the benefit of having that to consolidate all
So
those
this
resources.
doesn't, so I guess what I mainly want, your bill isn't contradicting anything that he and I have with what our findings from the council, the findings that we were put to the governor, that we've put into legislation. I just want to be sure we're not running two pieces of legislation that are contradicting each other.
I don't believe there's any contradiction in there. A lot of in the bill that I saw filed by Representative Lewis, and I believe he filed a companion over here, has a lot to do with child sexual abuse material and getting into those definitions. We have a little bit of a difference in the restitution piece.
Okay.
Asset forfeiture. The fund that this bill has sets up a money that can be allocated directly to victims. They're not payable directly to the victim, but it establishes a fund that they can draw money from. But in asset forfeiture, going back to when my time in law enforcement, when we did that with drugs, what happened was nobody owned anything. Okay, so we have 94 suspected illicit massage parlors here in the state of Missouri now. Those are all leased. That person does not own anything. You can't seize anything that you can't get your hands on. But this, it's tied to the it's tied to the perpetrator. So if they're convicted, that's restitution. And by the way, since it's restitution, it's tied to their earned compliance credits. So reduction of their sentence doesn't take place unless they paid that institution. That's the carrot and stick approach to get them to go get their cash and fork it over before they go to jail, because a lot of their assets are liquid. And when I say assets are liquid, it's either cryptocurrency, it's in cash apps, or some of the different Venmo. That's how these transactions are taking place. But it's not things that it's not assets you can seize. But again, that comes from just experience when going through, watching what happened on the war on drugs, how we went about that. Nobody drove a car, nobody owned any property, but they all had cash, but you couldn't get to it.
Gotcha. Okay, so in what your bill would be doing is the person purchasing sex is the one that would be, you'd be
The
getting
restitution comes from the trafficker.
Okay.
So say, for example, I have 3 identified victims. I'm a trafficker, and I have 3 identified victims. I get convicted. My restitution piece on that would be $30,000, $10,000 for each identified victim, and then another $2,500, which goes to the county in which the offense occurred, for further either education or being able to allocate those resources for further investigations.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for the bill handler? Thank you. We have not heard one of these bills yet, and so you're getting more questions than most people would, but we appreciate your patience in answering them so well.
I'll be glad to, and I'd love to meet with, I'll meet with all of you after this to be able to kind of hash out anything else that you might have. So,
Thank you, Representative. Can I get a show of hands of who's here to testify in support? And who's here in opposition? Anyone here for informational purposes only? Okay. We'll go ahead and just start coming forward, please. First witness in favor.
Good morning. I'm very grateful that this committee is discussing human trafficking and exploitation, and thank you for letting me share my story with you today. We have to address the epidemic in our country and educate people on what trafficking really looks like in Missouri.
Do you mind introducing yourself?
That would be great.
Thanks.
My name is Neil Getzlow. I'm a resident of Liberty, Missouri, and I'm sharing my testimony of a lived experience.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. We have to address the epidemic in our country and educate people on what this really looks like in Missouri, not what people imagine trafficking is from a movie. But I don't think you can talk about human trafficking without talking about the people who are creating the demand. Generally, it's men, and it's men like me. And I'm sharing my story because it is time that men take accountability for their actions. And I do offer up an apology that we have to spend time talking about this issue but it is an issue, and when we have to address it head on. My journey to this hearing room started back when I was 10 years old, back in 1980. That's where I was first exposed to pornography in what my friends called the Playboy Forest, this wooded area behind my elementary school where we'd ride our bikes and look at these magazines. My mom also had 2 giant stacks of Playboy and Penthouse magazines on either side of her bed, and when she would go to work, my preteen brain would take over and spend hours looking at that material as a way to combat the loneliness and abandonment that I was experiencing as a child. What I didn't realize was that the images I was looking at was transforming my brain. It was programming my views on love, sex, and relationships, and it taught me how to objectify women. From the first moment I was exposed, it took hold of my heart and wouldn't let go, impacting nearly every relationship I had in high school. But like any addict, soon I needed a stronger and stronger medication. My drug of choice was porn, but when that didn't satisfy me and I had access to more time and money as I got older, I started going to adult theaters and strip clubs, and finally that led me to acting out by searching for women who were selling sex. I visited women for the better part of my first marriage that ended in divorce, and that addiction continued into my second marriage and very nearly ruined that as well. The overwhelming majority of the women I visited were based in Missouri. However, on February 26, 2020, I was out of the state on a business trip, and I made an arrangement to meet a woman at her hotel room to pay for sex. As I was getting ready to leave her room, the second bedroom door opened up, and a large gentleman walked out and showed me his cell phone. In his hand was a cell phone that had my wife's contact information on there, and he said, "I'm going to have to pay him more money, or he's going to call my wife." I got out of that room about $900 later, but then a few days later, on March 1st, 2020, they texted me again asking for more money. When I refused, they called my wife. Honestly, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Getting my life unmasked set off a wild 6 weeks of activity where I finally confessed everything, first to God and then to my wife, Amy, on April 14, 2020, so coming up on 4 years. Thanks to the forgiveness of God and the forgiveness of my wife, I was given a chance at redemption. While Amy's forgiveness was key to having any chance to rebuild our marriage, it did not take away any accountability and responsibility that I had to show her that I was making a change and I was going to get the help needed to recover. And that's what I've done. April 13, 2020 was the last day I looked at pornography, and it was the last day I attempted to purchase sex from an exploited woman. It took a lot of work, but my life and marriage have been redeemed and restored, and that's why I'm here today. I want to make sure that the men creating the demand for trafficked women are more motivated to turn away from their activity. Often, these men like me participate in this activity from a place of pain. It's fueled by pornography. But again, that doesn't take away any of the accountability that we have. I think accountability and responsibility in today's culture are way too easy for people to ignore. Laws are written in ways that often lead to punishment of the victims of trafficking and exploitation, and they don't offer enough consequences and deterrence for men who are purchasing sex. When I was acting out the way I did, there was no fear of any legal implications of my decisions. Part of that was my addiction lying to me, but a lot of times men can get arrested for solicitation, get issued a citation for a misdemeanor, avoid jail time, maybe go to John school for a few hours and pay a nominal fine. That's it. And while getting caught like that may scare men for a few months, it does not offer true deterrence. That's why I'm hoping this bill can help generate that deterrence. Men creating the demand need to face accountability just as much as traffickers do. Now, I'll be honest, putting a law into place isn't going to magically end demand, and I don't pretend to have any new or different solutions. But in talking with victims, survivors, and other allies in this fight to end demand, I do believe that there are 4 key things that we need to do. Number 1, create stronger laws and accountability for traffickers and men creating the demand. And that's why I support this bill. That doesn't mean these men don't deserve a chance to rehabilitate. They absolutely do, and I'm a living example of what can happen. But that doesn't take away any accountability. Number 2, victim restitution is absolutely paramount to any new laws being established. We need to provide resources to the women and men who are trying to escape a life of trafficking and exploitation. A lack of money and housing is what keeps victims from being able to break free from that life. If we are truly serious about slowing demand, offering a way out for these people needs to be a top priority. There needs to be education resources for our communities to clearly define what trafficking is, who is being trafficked, and what the impact is having on our state. Speaking from my own experience, it wasn't until I stopped using pornography and buying sex that I realized that the overwhelming majority, 99.99% of the women I visited, were either trafficked by someone likely a family member or boyfriend, or I was exploiting them because they needed the money. Trafficking is not about the white van with no windows driving down the street, snatching people off the sidewalk. Trafficking and exploitation are just one Google search away right on the cell phone. I volunteer with a group called the Epic Project. We're a bunch of guys that meet once a month on a Friday night. We put ads online written by survivors, and when men call in looking to buy sex, we answer the phones. We try to educate them, help them make better decisions, and warn them that the women they are trying to buy are being trafficked. I will say we did a patrol. This is a nationwide group. We did a patrol in December covering 57 man hours, and across these 8 different patrols, we averaged 1 call every 2 minutes for those 57 hours. And then finally, and I know this is not the topic of the bill today, but I know that there are bills being discussed in the House. I believe we need to regulate pornography like we regulate alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes. There's enough research and scientific data that shows the damage pornography creates in the human brain. It's time that we regulate it and treat it like a drug it is to ensure that minors 18 years and younger cannot access this material that keeps the cycle of objectification, addiction, and demand going. And with that, I just say thank you so much for letting me share. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for your testimony
Yeah.
very much. Any questions for this witness? Senator Thompson Reyder.
I just want to say thank you from a female's standpoint for you to, I mean, not just be sorry for what, but to actually be actively trying to make this better and to fix this. Thank you. It's tremendous that you're here. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I can tell you that the number of men that are impacted by pornography, it's off the charts. You know, the numbers say 3 out of every 5 men. But I bet the other 2 guys are probably not telling the truth. So it's an issue. It's what's driving, and it's what's driving the demand. So thank you.
Senator Carter.
Just as a mom with boys and obviously I have girls, I've got 5 kids, but this is something we discuss constantly. And to have a very transparent conversation with your kids about the realities of what's going on there and trying not to just put it under the carpet and say that it doesn't exist. It's very difficult for me as a mom to understand the reality of what my boys face. And in those honest conversations, understanding what they face every day is, thank you so much again to reiterate Senator Reyder's comments. But as a man, it's so nice to hear somebody coming up and trying to find solutions and to add a little validity to the plight that other men are facing also with this issue and to champion the cause. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Yep, thank you.
Next witness in support, please come forward. Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none. Next witness in support. Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. Next witness in support, please come forward. Is your microphone on? Thank
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Marcia Hazelhorst. I'm the Executive Director of Missouri Juvenile Justice Association. We are here to testify in support of House Bill 1706 and 1539. I agree with the previous testimony. I don't know that I have additional information to add other than the training component in particular is very much in line with Juvenile Officer Performance Standard 1.4, which requires juvenile officers to have training in trafficking indicators. So this just formalizes that even further. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Marcia. I have a question about the training component. And do you know whether this brings us in line with what other states are doing, whether we'll be providing more training requirements?
I'm not sure I can answer that.
Okay. We'll just get to me later. That's okay. Thank you so much.
No
Any
problem.
other questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness in support.
Chair, members of the committee, Jessica Petrie here on behalf of the Missouri Network Against Child Abuse, which was until recently Missouri Kids First, the statewide association for the child advocacy centers, who you heard so eloquently explain the importance of the hearsay provisions in 491 and 492. So just want to specifically go on record in support of the changes in those two chapters to make sure that all children, not just those up to 14, are getting the supports they need in the courtroom, which we know is going to be difficult for anybody regardless of their age. So appreciate your consideration of that piece.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none. Next witness in support, please come forward.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Catherine Monroe here for the Attorney General's office. We are here to testify in support of this bill. It's a very important effort to our office, anti-human trafficking, and we would be honored to assist in any way the legislature authorizes us to do so.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none. Next witness in support, please come forward. Any other witnesses in support? Are there any witnesses in opposition? Anyone here for informational purposes only? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing. Thank you so much, and it will also conclude this committee meeting.